evening, everyone. Thank you for being here for the opening night of the 48th edition of the Toronto International Film Festival. Are you ready to rock?
What a fantastic looking audience. Well, y'all want to celebrate, you naughty kids. You should be in bed with your beautiful wife.
This is the moment. We've been waiting for it. Now we know. I know that there's other things you can be doing tonight. There's other movie screenings. I heard that there's a Nickelback show outside. It's like doing up some Nickelback fans in Toronto.
First of all, thanks so much for coming tonight, guys. This is amazing.
A lot of you here. Thank you.
Tim, it is a tremendous honor to be here. It's like a little emotional for some reason. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You'll be mine again.
What
If you could see
Hey, Toronto. I feel like Drake.
Wait, one time. On the count of three, long live Montero. 1, 2, 3.
This is like one of the best moments of my life.
Why everyone loves film is because you people really love movies.
And the reason why I do what I do is to make things for you guys.
They asked me before, like, well, do you want to sit through the screening or do you want to go out and get a bite, go to a bar or something? Hell no, I'm going to sit and watch it with the Toronto audience. I'm like, this is always so fun, you know?
This festival, we rely on it. It's the lifeblood of our industry. 3 planes canceled. I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a bus. So I took the night bus from New York to Toronto. Glad I did.
The fact that this event tonight and all of you are helping raise money for people who have dreams and give people a chance to make their dreams come true like you made so possible tonight. Such beautiful gifts making out. Thank you to all of you for being here.
Thanks to the volunteers making all this shit happen. That's really pretty. Thank you guys for jumping in.
Filled with a celebration of the power of human connection, especially in a time such as right now.
I hope that we can remember to be of service to one another, to sit across tables and talk to each other, because we need each other. This is about service. In many ways, we're in service to the world.
That's the best intro I've ever had to start a lecture. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Julie Davis, the Vice President of External Relations and Development at Trent University, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to the 2023 Tapscott-Lopes Business and Society Lecture. This lecture series brings prominent speakers to Trent with a goal to bring the campus and the community together, and I see that we have accomplished that. We have students, faculty, staff, cinephiles, community members, retirees, and it's just a wonderful exchange of learning. I know that we're excited to hear the speaker tonight, so I do want to have a few introductions. Of course, we're gathered here in this beautiful building on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga, and we treasure our friendship with the local First Nations, and we work together very hard to take care of the land, the water, and the creatures, large and small. This evening's event is thanks to the generosity of Dr. Don Tapscott and Dr. Anna Lopez, who established this lecture series in 2001. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about these two wonderful supporters of Trent. Don Tapscott is an international expert on business strategy, technology, and its transformative impact on the world. In fact, the Washington Technology Report has called him one of the most influential media authorities since Marshall McLuhan. He's the author or co-author of more than 16 wildly read and hugely influential books on the application of technology to business, such as Paradigm Shift, The Digital Economy, Wikinomics, and the Blockchain Revolution. He has coined many concepts that are part of the business lexicon today and advises corporate and government leaders around the world. And he's one of the few speakers to have 2 TED Talks. Don is a member of the Order of Canada and has received many awards and accolades. He's been a longtime supporter of Trent University. He chaired the Beyond Our Walls fundraising campaign and has given many talks at Trent events throughout the world. Most importantly to us, he was Trent's 11th chancellor and the first Trent alumnus to serve in this role. He held the role for 2 terms, 6 years, and presided over 47 convocation ceremonies. Unfortunately, Don couldn't join us in person tonight, but he is watching on the live stream, so please give him a big round of applause. Now, Dr. Ana Lopes is here with us this evening. Ana is an entrepreneur, change agent, volunteer leader, and philanthropist. Ana founded Cyrilex Communications after more than 10 years in government, including as executive assistant to Premier Bob Rae. She currently serves as a director of the Tapscott Group, Inc., a privately held think tank focusing on digital revolution in business and society. Ana has served on and often chaired some of the most significant cultural, health, and fundraising boards in the country, including the Toronto International Film Festival, Toronto Symphony Foundation, Community Food Centres Canada, Centre for Addiction and Mental Health Foundation, the Writers' Trust of Canada, Sunnybrook Hospital Foundation, Women College Hospital Foundation, and Trent University, just to name some of the places where she's made a big difference. Ana served 2 terms on the Trent Board of Governors, ending her tenure as vice chair, and was granted a lifetime appointment as Governor Emerita at the conclusion of her service. Ana was instrumental in the establishment of Zosky College and has contributed her expertise and connections to help advance Trent in many ways. In 2018, the Trent University Alumni Association recognized Ana's years of dedication by awarding her an honorary alumna status. And in 2022, she was awarded an honorary Doctor of Laws by the university, and is also a member of the Order of Canada, as well as being part of our family. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ana Lopes to the stage to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Julie, and welcome all tonight. It is a real privilege to have the opportunity to introduce Cameron Bailey, who, as everyone knows, is the CEO of TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, and the world's largest public film festival, and also one of Canada's premier internationally recognized cultural brands. Everywhere you go in the world, people know TIFF. Cameron has been with TIFF for more than 2 decades, but he has really led TIFF over the last few years through some of its most challenging times. TIFF pivoted gracefully through COVID by going digital, but under Cameron's leadership, it has come roaring back to pre-COVID audience levels and a wonderful lineup of international films. This past year, as we all know, the actor and writer strikes posed a real challenge for film festivals around the world, and for us as well, obviously. And once again, with Cameron's visionary leadership, we were able to develop a wonderful international lineup of films, and those films created a global buzz. TIFF adapted, it pivoted in all the right ways with Cameron at the helm. So I have the privilege with working with Cameron as a TIFF board member, and I'm always struck by his leadership under pressure. He has ensured that TIFF is committed not just to what I have just said previously about the international scope of our business, but a commitment to diversity in storytelling and a commitment to making sure that different identities and perspectives are represented at TIFF, and this is really the TIFF brand. Internationally and throughout the film industry, the value of Toronto audiences is indispensable. I'm sure you've all heard that we're a huge predictor of who goes on to win Oscars. In fact, TIFF has been the landing pad for the past 20 years of almost every Oscar-winning film. And that puts Cameron and his team at the center of what industry puts out and what audiences love. And he is definitely an executive with his finger on the pulse. So Cameron and I and a bunch of TIFF executives were in Cannes at the film festival. And, you know, Canada hosts an event there. It's wildly well attended. I was shocked. Hundreds of people come to the Canadian event, and everybody wanted to know, was Cameron going to be there? And where is Cameron? And is he going to be speaking? He is a superstar everywhere he goes. And he is so widely respected. It's just absolutely wonderful to have him here. Don Tapscott, my husband, and I, and he's really sorry he's not here tonight, endowed this lecture series to evolve the role of business and society. TIFF's mission is to change the way we see the world through film, and we hope that Cameron's talk today will illuminate that aspect of our mission by expanding the conversation and bringing a perspective of the arts in Canada. So Cameron was born in London, England. He grew up in England and Barbados, and before migrating to Canada, he began his career as a film critic, then joined TIFF as a programmer, selecting Canadian films before moving on to African and South Asian cinema. He has taught film curation at the University of Toronto and holds an honorary Doctor of Laws from the Western University. He is a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, which presents the Oscars, so that's super influential, and a Chevalier in France's Order of Arts and Letters. For 12 years, between 2012 and the present moment, Toronto Life magazine has named him as one of Toronto's 50 most influential people. So it's my honor to welcome Cameron to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction, Anna. It was great being in Cannes with you. It is a bit of a wild place, but we go there to do a whole lot of work. You know, whenever I'm in a classroom like this, I always think of Good Will Hunting, and I think I should be just doing, lots of formulas on the board if I knew how to do that. I don't. I am a humanities graduate. Proudly so. Let's get started. Thank you to Anna Lopez and to Don Tapscott for inviting me to present this talk. Thanks to Trent University and all of the students, faculty, and staff here, and members of the Peterborough community as well. You know, when I was first invited to speak in this series that's included Don Tapscott himself and people like David Suzuki, I thought of telling the story of TIFF and our TIFF Bell Lightbox Center as a cultural hub in downtown Toronto, and I would hope that I would be able to match the stature of previous speakers, talking about how did we do it, why is it important, all of those things. But as I thought about what people ask me most, I landed on another idea. The idea is this: 20 questions. Now, usually the game of 20 questions involves simply yes or no answers. And that would be a very short talk, so I'll do a little bit more than that. Instead, I want to see if 20 questions and 20 answers can give you the full picture of what TIFF is, what we do, where we fit, and why it matters. So let's count down from 20 to 1, and we should probably start with the fundamentals. Are movies still a thing? Yes, they are, as it turns out, but thanks for asking. They're not the thing that they used to be in the way they used to be. And some of you, if you study film history or you've just watched movies over many decades, you will know that movies used to be at the very center of entertainment and culture, not just in North America, but in most of the world. In 1930, 65% of North Americans went to the movies every single week. In 2000, that number had changed from 65% to 9.7%. And of course, back in the day, in the 1930s and 40s, the heyday of movies, you would go and you would see your favorite movie stars, you would see different genres, comedies, musicals, westerns, melodramas, not so much superheroes at that time, but movies that really told many different kinds of stories. Now, of course, one of the big changes is that intellectual property, or IP, dominates movies these days, whether it's a previous movie or a TV show or a book or a toy. Back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, I would say, movies were aimed mainly at an adult audience, which seems remarkable now, because movies are mainly aimed at a younger audience, teenagers and, let's say, people in their early 20s at the most. One interesting figure that I saw as I was going through just the research over the last 20 plus years. Since 2004, every top movie of the year based on box office has been based on previous IP. Star Wars movies, Harry Potter movies, Marvel movies, DC movies, a Top Gun movie, like 25 years after the first one, and now, of course, this year, the top movie of the year will be based on a toy, Barbie. Yes! I am also a fan. But if you want to go back to when movies that could top the box office were not necessarily based on previous intellectual property, you have to go. There's a little bit of a carve-out for 2003, 20 years ago, when Finding Nemo was the top box office film of the year. But really the last film that you could make an argument was aimed at an adult audience and that wasn't based on previous IP was 1998. Does anybody know what that was? Titanic. Which became a classic, but that was the last time a movie was at the top of the box office that wasn't based on something else. And part of that is due to what many of us will know as what we now call the blockbuster, which is a term that was first introduced to refer to actual blockbusting bombs that were dropped during the Second World War. But then Variety, the industry trade publication, took that up in the late 1940s and began to use it to refer to big movies that would destroy the competition. Not the first or the last link between war imagery and the movie business, by the way. But in 1975, a blockbuster came along that changed everything. That was Jaws. And then 2 years later, another blockbuster came along named Star Wars. Back then, we just called it Star Wars. Now it's Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. But those two films became the model for what movie entertainment became. And they were just the most recent at the time attempt to counter changes in the culture. So if in 1930, 65% of North American audiences were going to the movies every week, the erosion of that audience began first with television, which had reached some mass penetration of North American homes in the 1950s, and then in the 1980s, VHS home video. Some of you will remember VHS home video. You may still have them at home. Then DVDs in the 1990s, the internet, of course, and now streaming, all competing for the attention of theatrical movies. And now we measure movie attendance quite differently. So there was a recent Canadian study that reported the spectacular news that over 70% of Canadians went to see a movie once in a whole year. So from the 1920s to the 40s, movies were perhaps one of the most important forms of mass entertainment, maybe vying only with radio, and things have changed. They've changed quite a lot. At the same time, though, movies are still culturally very significant because they drive other forms of mass entertainment. The movies of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Pixar, for instance, drive most of the popularity of the Disney Plus streaming service. The streaming service exists because of the content that starts out on the big screen. In fashion, movie stars like Zendaya, Anne Hathaway, Jennifer Lawrence, Daniel Craig drive fashion advertising. What fashion magazines and fashion brands want most is a glamorous, sexy movie star to peddle their wares. Not TV stars for some reason, but movie stars because they still have that larger-than-life quality. And movies remain a kind of a cultural reference point as well. When you see, whether it's on the news, on your social media feed, or in real life, something like a hurricane, a forest fire, we've seen too many of those recently, earthquake, disaster footage, one of the first things that comes out of people's mouths, and you see this in news footage all the time, is people saying in awe, it was like something out of a movie. And that has not changed. We saw it with the horrendous footage from the attacks on 9/11. We've seen it more recently as well. We saw it with the tsunami in Southeast Asia. And when we ourselves are in those moments that just feel larger than life, that feel catastrophic somehow, whether it's just emotionally catastrophic or physically catastrophic, we often reach for movies as a point of comparison, as a way to help describe and make sense of what we're feeling and what we're seeing, because the only other place we have that larger-than-life, big-scale experience is at the movies. So movies in our minds are still huge, even if we don't go to see them as often as we used to. But what film festivals do, what TIFF does, is different. Yes, we do launch the occasional massive, large-scale blockbuster. We had Dune at our festival a couple of years ago. We launched the Ridley Scott film, The Martian, which went on to make about $500 million at the global box office. But mostly we work to bring independent films from all over the world. Over 70 countries most years, shorts and features, dramas and documentaries, straight-ahead entertainment and experimental film, and everything in between. And you never know where those indie filmmakers will go after a festival launch. Back in 1999, we had a film at the festival called Following by an unknown British filmmaker who went on to do pretty well. His name was Christopher Nolan, and he arrived at our festival really not knowing anybody. And that's been repeated many, many times. As recently as 2010, we premiered a mock superhero film called Super, which was directed by James Gunn. He was then an independent filmmaker. He now heads DC Studios. And that is what festivals can do in terms of building that bridge between the independent films, sometimes smaller scale, and then the gargantuan scale that represents what commercial movie making is now. This past year at our festival, just as a kind of a reference point, we had over 250,000 attendees screening at our screenings over 11 days. And then we have a street fair as well. We call it Festival Street in the first half of the festival. And there we had another 425,000 attendees. That's a free series of events, screenings, concerts, different kinds of activations to give people a feel for the festival without having to spend a dime on a ticket. In order to put all of that together, we have about 180 full-time staffers, 700 seasonal staff who join us in the spring and summer, over 1,300 volunteers who all work together to deliver this amazing festival. And yes, we do work all year round putting on a festival. But not just a festival. So many people know us just for those 11 days in September, but there are a lot of other things we do. I just wanted to give you a sense of some of that as well. One of the things I'm proudest of, and which is maybe especially relevant here, is our film circuit network. We have over 100 community film clubs that stretch from Campbell River on Vancouver Island all the way to Newfoundland and Labrador's Fogo Island. That's one of our newest film circuit locations. These are local, volunteer-run film groups that organize screenings for their own communities with our help. Movies that would never come to their town, because in most places there is what you might call an independent cinema desert, where they just don't get to see the movies that you might in Montreal or Vancouver or Toronto. Often those are Canadian movies that we show through film circuit group partners by people like Mina Shum from Vancouver or Tracy Deer from Montreal. There's one here, the Peterborough Cinema and Archives at the Galaxy on Water Street. We have Cinefest Durham at the Cineplex on Grandview. We work with commercial cinemas, but we kind of invade a commercial multiplex with sometimes strange independent films, and that is just a delightful thing to do. We also at TIFF do a lot of talent development. Shamir Anderson is an actor you may have seen fighting Keanu Reeves in John Wick Chapter 4 this summer. He is a TIFF talent alum. Iman Vellani, who stars in the Miss Marvel series on that same Disney Plus streaming platform, got her start as a teenager through TIFF's Next Wave group. And those are just some of the alumni you may have heard of so far. We have a film reference library. We started that in 1990, taking over the work of the Ontario Film Institute, which allows us to provide a platform for research. We have Scholars, students come in to do research often on Canadian filmmakers through our film reference library, and we also do preservation. We have over 3,000 35mm film prints that we are charged with taking good care of. I'm not sure if you're aware, but film prints can easily last 100 years, whereas whatever recording technology is being used to record this talk tonight, 30, 40 years from now will probably be completely obsolete, and you may not be able to play what we're recording. But there is a durability to 35mm film that we are trying to preserve as well. We also do thousands of screenings all year round at our 6-screen complex, TIFF Bell Lightbox. That's a combination of new releases. If you were at our Lightbox tonight, you could see the new David Fincher film, The Killer. You could see the new Sofia Coppola film, Priscilla, and also the film that won the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival, Anatomy of a Fall, and more. And we also have a Cinematheque that screens a lot of art house classics from all over the world. And we work with partner festivals too. This weekend, the Brazil Film Festival is at the Lightbox, but we also partner with Imaginative, with Hot Docs, with Real Asian, and many other of Toronto's certainly biggest festivals. And in some cases, Imaginative is actually the largest Indigenous media festival in the world. So we're very proud and pleased to have them partner with us over many, many years as well. So that's kind of our idea of an urban cultural hub. I'll tell you a little bit more as well. A big part of it, besides the programming we put on, is the community that we try to generate and nurture at the Lightbox. Just a couple of weeks ago, on November 8th, we unveiled the Viola Desmond Cinema, our largest cinema in the Lightbox, about 500 seats. We just called it Cinema One for many years, which was as much imagination as we had at the time as we were opening a building. But we were inspired by the story of Viola Desmond in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia in 1946. Her act of resistance, as I'm sure you all know, took place in a movie theater. And it was a theater where there was informal, unofficial, unspoken but very real segregation. Black moviegoers were meant to sit in the balcony, white moviegoers were meant to sit on the main floor in the orchestra level. And our Cinema One also has a balcony and an orchestra, so we felt it was symbolic in a kind of a meaningful way to rename that after Viola Desmond. We worked with community partners like the NIA Center, a new Black Art Center in Toronto, the Oya Media Group, Black Women Film, and many others. And we also invited up Ava DuVernay, the African-American filmmaker, to launch her new film, Origin, on that day. And so creating a space that has the name and the spirit and the inspiration of Viola Desmond is a part of what we want to do. 2 floors up from that, we've just opened a new cafe bar at the Lightbox. It's called Varda, after the great French filmmaker Agnès Varda. And she was an inspiration for me personally as well. I got to know her towards the end of her life a little bit. And she's just a delightful person, a fierce, independent artist over many decades, broke so much ground for which she never got due credit at the time. She essentially started the French New Wave. That might be a somewhat controversial statement, but maybe not. And continued to break ground in so many ways, smearing the lines between feature film, fiction feature film, and documentary, between experimental film and commercial cinema, working with movie stars, but always making independent films. And so that's something we wanted to do. So we've opened a new cafe bar, which has Agnes's spirit all the way through it. And we want to remind people every time they step into our building of the inspiration of someone like Varda, and to create a community around like-minded artists today as well. So the figures who are most resonant for us, we want them present in the building. We want to always have a very high standard of curation and presentation. And we always want to pursue something that I think Agnès Varda embodied, which is curiosity and the value of new knowledge that comes from just asking questions and seeking those things out. That's how we arrive at our mission statement, which is to transform the way people see the world through film. It's not just to watch film. It's not just to appreciate the the art form and its history, but it's to be moved, literally moved from where you are right now to where you might be at the end of a film that really resonates with you, and the conversation especially that you have with it, with others who've seen it with you. So that's, I would say, some of the big picture vision for what TIFF does, but we also get this question a lot: what is our business model? We're 48 years old. We're a not-for-profit organization. We have charitable status, which does help. It's necessary, certainly, for the work we do. And just in terms of the basic revenue model, we look at it as a third, a third, a third. So 1/3 of the revenue comes from corporate partnerships. 1/3 comes from what we call advancement. In our case, that's philanthropic donors. That's members of TIFF, about 12,000 households now. And that's government as well, all levels. And then the remaining third from box office, the festival box office being the largest part of that, also year-round, of course. And for all of that support, we try to deliver first-rate cultural experiences to hundreds of thousands of people every year, and also a large group of culturally engaged, socially active, diverse Canadians, which we think is part of the social good, but also it turns out that many people want access to to that audience as well, and we try to find partnerships that actually work where whether there's a brand that wants to speak to that audience, and we want to bring the audience that's interested in hearing from that brand together. That's also part of what we do, and that's how we stay in business, and that allows us to do our work that is more philanthropic, the talent development, the cinematheque, the preservation, and some of the curation, and try to find that balance. And it is, I would say, a daily rethinking of do we have exactly the right balance in terms of all of the things we're trying to do. In terms of our audience, and I have recent festival numbers, 82% live in the Greater Toronto area, so we're actually quite a local event in that way. But internationally, we have a significant reach in terms of the audience that sees our work and engages with it online. 7.1 million people engaged with TIFF online this year. 225 million social media impressions just so far this year. Our audience demographically is roughly 61% women or female identifying, and 43% age 19 to 34. And that is a massive victory for any large cultural organization to have an audience that's that young. Didn't used to be that way, but we've been able to put some new measures in place to really encourage young people to come out. Turns out one way to do it is to make stuff free. So it took us about 46 years to get there. So, slow learners, but we eventually got there. And what we did coming out of the pandemic, and really the pandemic allowed us to make some big strategic shifts that maybe we would not have done without the existential threat that a pandemic presented to all cultural organizations. Members at TIFF now get to see all of our Cinematheque screenings for free. There's roughly 300 of them every year. These are some of the finest films that have ever been made, presented in different kinds of series, and for the price of a single membership, you can see all of them, or as many of them as you can manage for free. So, and there's other free things that we offer as well, and that's brought in young people by the thousands, which has been great. And once they come to see something for free, then they're interested in what else we have to offer, and that's been a big part of our bounce back from the pandemic. Online, we have a YouTube channel that is our home for lots of videos that we produce. Hundreds of them are there. The most popular one, it's been watched about 9 million times. It is a kind of a compilation and a video essay about sex in film, and that is our most popular one. I'm not sure why, but that's what the numbers say. And then others include a Slavoj Žižek masterclass, which I think the philosophers in the house will perhaps appreciate, seen by 1.2 million viewers on our YouTube channel, which coincidentally, weirdly, is the same number who watched the Q&A with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper for A Star Is Born. And it's also the same 1.2 million number that watched the trailer for a Nigerian film in 2016 that we premiered called The Wedding Party. So Zizek, Gaga, and Nollywood, that is TIFF. The market activity at our festival every year has grown and grown, and that's something we're really interested in doing more of. These days, roughly $50 million in sales happens at our festival, and about 5,000 industry delegates are in town making those deals. Get this question sometimes, where do we rank? So there is no official ranking of film festivals, of course, but I think I could say that Cannes is probably seen widely as the most prestigious film festival in the world. How do you measure prestige? Well, I'd say in this case it's the number of the most critically acclaimed filmmakers who premiere with you. The currency of film festivals is premieres. It's essentially who gets to show a film first to the world. And Cannes certainly has some of the greatest filmmakers premiering there every year. For Sundance, I think that's really similar, but within the American context. It is the most prestigious American film festival. Of course, its founder was Robert Redford, and it has that movie star, classic Hollywood aura around it, but also a terrific track record of launching American independent films that go on to great success. There's one this year that I think you'll be hearing a lot more of if you haven't yet seen it. It's called Past Lives, directed by Celine Song, and it premiered in January at Sundance. She's actually a Korean-Canadian filmmaker who moved to New York, and the story she tells in Past Lives is between Korea, Canada, and New York. A beautiful love story, and I think you're going to see it nominated for an Oscar in about 2 months' time. So we're the largest public film festival in the world, and that is one of our claims to fame. Our audience really is our secret sauce. I think also our programming is among the most diverse in the world, and that's partly because our audience is also among the most diverse film festival audience that you'll find anywhere. And if you care about movie stars, and some people do, then I would say more stars attend our festival in any given year than Cannes and Sundance combined. That's partly due to the size of our festival, our proximity to where stars tend to live in LA, New York, London, Paris, Tokyo. We direct flight from everywhere, unlike Cannes or Sundance. The media here, but especially the audience in Toronto as well. Of course, movie stars are not the most important thing, but I still get this question. And the answer is yes, a lot. And turns out they're just like us. It's true. And I raise this, somewhat facetiously because this year, with the SAG-AFTRA actors strike, was a year of surprising threat to TIFF because actors, including stars, were not going to be able to attend in the same way that they usually would. We're a film festival, so we still had the films. When the strike was called in July, we already had our lineup almost completed. But what became entirely uncertain was who was going to come to present those films. And we spent weeks on the phone, on email, on Zoom, almost film by film, actor by actor, working out who could confirm to come. And there was so much uncertainty. There had not been an actors' strike in Hollywood for 40 years, so nobody really had any playbook for how to do this. But what happened was, through a variety of things, something called interim agreements and different means, we were able to secure lots of actors considered movie stars. You saw in that video off the top, Ethan Hawke got on a bus from New York because his flight was delayed and canceled. He would have missed an event. Got on a bus so that he could be in Toronto to present his film and to attend our Tribute Awards Gala because he didn't want to let the Toronto audience down. He didn't want to let TIFF down, and it's amazing. There should be a movie about Ethan Hawke riding a bus from New York. Maybe in a few years we'll see that. He wasn't the only one. Salma Hayek, Viggo Mortensen, Sylvester Stallone, many big stars came from Hollywood and found a way to do it, respecting the guidelines of the strike, but being able to present their work there. And then, of course, many stars from beyond Hollywood as well. The massive Hong Kong star, the icon, Andy Lau came. Anil Kapoor came from India. Big stars from South Korea as well, Lee Byung-hun and Park Seo-joon from the film Concrete Utopia. And that international star presence has been a big part of what we've done for many years. When I first started as co-director of the festival in 2008 and then in 2009, one of the things I really wanted to do was to bring more global stars to our festival. And I remember one year we brought a film by the Indian filmmaker Karan Johar called Kabhi Alvida Nakena, and it included the stars Amitabh Bachchan and Shah Rukh Khan, massive superstars for anybody who watches Indian films. The night before, at our biggest theater, Roy Thomson Hall, we had Brad Pitt. Not too shabby. But the next day, we had Amitabh Bachchan and Karan Johar and Shah Rukh Khan, and the audience was bigger, the volume was louder, the intensity of excitement was so much bigger than even Brad Pitt. And that's one thing that we can do in Toronto. We can fill a house that's almost 2,000 seats with just crazed fans for big stars from almost any country that produces big stars. And it is a fantastic thing to do. Why does stardom matter? Well, because it is a source, a kind of a wellspring of very strong human emotion. And I don't care who you are or what you're into, there's somebody that you'd be excited to be in the same room with, right? And it could be a sports star, it could be a movie star, it could be, a star from the world of science or business or economics or whatever it might be, a Nobel Prize winner. But we all have that feeling of wanting to be close to great accomplishment, and I don't ever downplay or mock fandom that arises from movie stars, because fandom is not just that relationship with your idol, the object of your adoration, but is also the relationship with other fans. And that's a beautiful thing. When you have a group of people gathered in a crowd and so excited because they're together with other people who share that love, it's really an amazing thing. And those stars can come from absolutely anywhere on the planet. And that feeling and that community is why movie stars matter. And it's why it's important that our film selection also go way beyond Hollywood and Canadian films. So I want to talk a little bit about this question that we often get: how do we choose the movies we show? We've got a pretty, involved programming process, but really it boils down to TIFF hiring smart, informed people to make the choices and then letting them make the choices. Many festivals have a single artistic director or head of the festival who makes all of the final decisions. That is not me. I have never done that in my role at TIFF, but my job is to find the people who will find the films that will connect with our audience. And so we have a documentary expert, programmer, experimental film, East Asian cinema, Midnight Madness genre cinema. In each case, a leader in their field, and their focus is in a particular area where they have expertise. Not unlike, say, a university, right, where you've got people who are specialists in certain areas, and you let them do what they do, and you give them as much independence as you possibly can. We give certain guidelines, ground rules every year. Things might shift a little bit in terms of what we've learned from the previous year, but that independence that the programmers have is really, really important. Their personal taste, guided by our, which you might call institutional judgment, I suppose, is what leads to how we choose the films. And so choosing the programmers is that most important thing. And if a TIFF programmer happens to fall in love with a 10-hour black and white Filipino art house film, it's great, it's in. That film, by the way, exists. It's called Evolution of a Filipino Family by Lav Diaz. It premiered at the Toronto Film Festival in 2004, and it's not a comedy. So I get this question too. Why are movies at film festivals so depressing? I'm still not sure what people mean by depressing. And I guess what I would say in response is that movies are made to do different things. They're often made to divert us from our day-to-day lives, just the regular humdrum, everyday experience. Sometimes they're made to excite. There's something called the cinema of spectacle, which is very predominant now, which is mostly about giving you that euphoria of a roller coaster ride. Those are the movies that I think Martin Scorsese is not a fan of, famously. And many movies are made simply to entertain, to take you on a journey that kind of has to end happily. Even horror movies, commercial horror movies, tend to end somewhat happily. If the protagonist wins, no matter what they go through, that is a typical commercial entertainment. Hollywood makes those, of course, in great number, but so does India, China, Egypt, Nigeria. Many, many countries have long histories of industries that churn out commercial entertainments that take you on a journey but end happily. But movies can really do so much more. They can do some of what novels do, explore the human condition on a deep level. They can illuminate places, periods, human states that we may never experience ourselves in our own lives. They can do what visual art does, which is to show us new ways of seeing, or what music does, that movies can move us on an emotional, visceral level that's beyond rational thought. One thing I still love about watching movies together with strangers in the dark is that you have to surrender. The screen is bigger than you. The sound is all around you. And you are vulnerable, in a way, to the experience of what the film is offering you. In a movie theater. It's very different on your couch at home, watching whatever amazing screen you have at home. It's not as great as a movie screen in a movie theater. And that feeling is something that is, I think, akin to music, and it is why people are prone to cry more, to laugh bigger, to feel more scared, because the experience is bigger than us. And movies can unsettle us, they can shift us from how we usually move through the world, and some countries excel at that. France, very good. Austria, never seen a movie from Austria that's not depressing but also brilliant. Taiwan, Poland, Iran, and as it turns out, Canada, which prompts this question. Some of you may know the book called Weird Sex and Snowshoes. Not surprisingly, it's about Canadian movies. And why are Canadian movies so weird? Well, there's lots of reasons. I'm sure many minds in this room have lots of thoughts about that. Maybe we can discuss that later. I would suggest it's a combination or a cocktail of the funding, much lower than commercial American movies, so they don't have to make back hundreds of millions of dollars, but also they can't do spectacle in the way that Hollywood movies or Bollywood movies can do. So funding, distribution as well. Canadian movies have a really hard time being seen on Canadian screens. There's a long history of that. And also a culture of a small film industry that's right next to the biggest, most dominant film industry in the world. We're in a unique place in Canada. And I think that gives Canadian filmmakers kind of a really valuable chip on their shoulders, which I think delivers interesting, sometimes very aggressively uncommercial movies, and I don't think it's an accident. And you know, there's something that is structural as well. Most Canadians go to see movies when they see movies at all. They go to see Hollywood movies. All of that money goes to the Hollywood company that made the movie and to the Canadian exhibitor that is showing you the movie in the movie theater. Very little gets back to Canadian filmmakers generally. Outside of Quebec, most Canadian movies don't turn a profit. But that's not the case in every country. There's a long history of Canada trying to get a kind of a levy on box office, on movie tickets, so that would go back to support the homegrown Canadian film industry. been, I think, tried since probably the 1930s at different stages over the years. It's never happened. I don't expect to see it happen in my lifetime. But other countries have done it. France has done it, and South Korea did it as well, which maybe is part of the answer to this question. If you watch South Korean movies at all, not all of them, but some of the great directors, Lee Chang-dong, Park Chan-wook, and of course Bong Joon-ho, among the leading ones, you'll see a very high level of craft, a kind of daring, a kind of intensity to those films, and maybe surprisingly, but not entirely, an ability for those films to be seen, embraced, understood all over the world. And I think there's an interesting cocktail there as well. There's a relatively recent political history in Korea where many of the filmmakers currently working lived through very volatile politics, military dictatorship, all kinds of upheaval politically. Koreans also, men have to do military service. And so these are artists often who've lived through different experience than, let's say, your typical Canadian filmmaker or American filmmaker. There's an excellent education system, very good universities and film training in South Korea. There's a veneration of artists generally that doesn't exist everywhere. There's also, I think, a manufacturing scale, which you see in your Hyundai and Kia cars, in your LG and Samsung TV sets and phones, that I think is transferable culturally and maybe economically as well in terms of how Korean movies are funded, produced, and post-produced. It is a country of massive manufacturing, and I think where you see manufacturing, you often see cinema. Cinema is a mechanical medium originally, and it started in places that made machines that made things. And in South Korea, I think that's still partly the case. And so those giant conglomerates, the chaebol of South Korea, have their film corollaries in companies like CJ, which is a massive South Korean company that operates like a Samsung or Hyundai does. There's also remarkable social cohesion in South Korea. Most South Koreans are ethnically South Korean and share the same language from top to the bottom of the country. Similar stories, cultural references that produce a kind of a common bond, which I think its greatest artists exploit and tap into. And there's also, I think, alongside all of these other reasons, a really strong anti-authority bias. South Korean filmmakers make movies about class in ways that I think few filmmakers do in the West anymore. And Parasite, which won the Oscar for Best Picture by Bong Joon-ho, is one of the greatest recent examples of that. So the history of films and the history of the culture surrounding the films that get made by any particular country is really important. And I think it's important to think about these things as we figure out why movies today are the way they are, and it's why this question can be so frustrating, because too few people, I think, watch old movies. And so many people think old movies are out of date, which I find the strangest thing. I don't think we think of Rembrandt paintings as being out of date. Nobody paints like Rembrandt anymore, so why do you have to even look at them? Or Renoirs, or the Great Impressionists, or any Picasso. So old. We don't think of other art forms that way, but I think many people, many current moviegoers, think of movies that way, and I think it's partly because the vocabulary of cinema from previous decades is not as well known. It's a fairly recent art form still. Just over 100 years old. But there is sometimes a confusion because movies are such a technological medium, a confusion with between technological advancement and artistic advancement. So no, today's painters aren't better than the painters of 100 years or 500 years ago, but they're just different, and I think that's what I'm trying to encourage people to do, partly through our Cinematheque as well, is to learn the language of older movies, silent cinema, subtitle cinema from other parts of the world in previous decades to understand how those movies work, and understand that visual storytelling probably saw some of its greatest achievements 70, 80, 90 years ago, that in many cases are superior to what you're seeing from the most advanced visual effects driven movies today that just don't have the same kind of narrative sophistication. So I'm not subtweeting Marvel here, but you know, what about Marvel? Marvel's great. This is the mythology of our time, but I think we have to admit that some of the movies suck. Not all of them. Having a child who's now 14, I have watched every movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and far more of the series than I would have liked to. But you know, you can appreciate the vision and the scale and the depth of narrative that that they present as a group, and still realize that sometimes there's only so much juice in any one basket of oranges, right? At a certain point, you can only squeeze so much out of them, and then they're done. You got to find something new to work with. So now, as I think we're seeing a little bit of the last gasp of the current Marvel phase, I'm excited to see and to present work by new original filmmakers, maybe one of you in this room, which prompts another question we often get: how do I get to make a movie? And the answer is so simple: just make it. If you think a movie is something that costs millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars and requires hundreds of people and trucks lined up on the street, then maybe that's a hard movie to make. But if you think a movie is something that just expresses an idea, a feeling, a story in moving images and sound, you've got that in your pocket. We all do. And the cameras that exist, and even the editing software that exists on our phones now is superior to what existed maybe 40 years ago almost anywhere. So if you want to make a movie, make a movie. Use your friends, find a community of like-minded people, and just keep making things. The great filmmakers often come out of just repetition, practicing your craft, going to the woodshed, and just repeating what you need to repeat to learn your skills. And you can do it in a very small scale. And if you're doing it well, it attracts more attention, more collaborators, sometimes more resources as well. Ava DuVernay, who made that film Origin, made Selma and many other films, and also some TV series, started her career as a filmmaker quite late. She was a film publicist for many years, worked on Michael Mann's movies and others, and she decided at a certain point she wanted to make movies. She wasn't happy just publicizing other people's movies. And what she did is she went and she got every single Criterion DVD she could find. At that point, there might have been 100 or so of them out there. She bought them or rented them, and she just watched them all and rewatched them. And she learned how the great filmmakers, the ones that Criterion had deemed great, crafted their own cinema. And because the Criterion Collection is fairly wide-ranging, it's Hollywood, it's European cinema, Latin American, Asian cinema, you could see different styles, different traditions in film as well. And she absorbed all of that, and she didn't go to film school, didn't spend the years and the sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars that are necessary in many film schools, and she just watched films, figured out what story she wanted to tell, and used what she'd learned by watching to make movies. So it can be done. I know because I did a short film myself many years ago, almost 20 years ago, and was in a short program with, where is my colleague from that short program, who might be here tonight. And I won't make another film, but I'm glad I made that one. It's hard as hell. You have to start with a blank screen, a blank page, and but it's a good discipline for anybody, even if you don't plan to do it for longer. Here's another one. How'd you get to run TIFF? Good fortune. The short version of the story is I studied literature, English literature and language at Western University. And I hear it's a good school, not as good as Trent, but people seem to like it, some of them. And I took a film course there, and that just opened my mind to cinema that I hadn't ever considered before. I'd only seen mostly movies on TV that were just those Hollywood movies that just would show up on the TV screen after many years. But I learned that movies could do so much more than entertain, that they could deal with ideas, with complicated, difficult emotions, with characters who weren't necessarily likable, with protagonists who didn't win at the end. All of those kinds of things were exciting to me. I began to write about film. I became a film critic when I graduated, and then I was invited by TIFF to become a programmer, selecting first Canadian films, then African films, South Asian films, and many others, and then one thing led to another. I was, in almost all of those stages of my career, the only person who looked like me in the rooms that I was in, whether those are screening rooms or meeting rooms, whether they were in Canada or around the world. So this is one that I get sometimes. And the answer I give is that, leading while Black first starts with imagining yourself in a leadership position, which many people who are from marginalized groups, not just Black people, but anyone who is not of an identity that is seen as a leader, has to first imagine themselves in that leadership role. If they've never seen themselves, they can't imagine themselves often. And that was certainly the case for me. So that was the first thing. I had a friend who really encouraged me to think about roles beyond what I was doing at the time, and I hadn't really lifted my eyes up that high yet. But I learned that there are, in addition to the education that's necessary, and sometimes the things that you don't have, a kind of a social network from the school you went to when you're growing up, that there are certain tools that you have because of that background that are very helpful. There are powers of observation that anyone from a marginalized community have that are attuned in a different way than from a more mainstream community. You need to know how to navigate spaces in a different way. So your antenna are up and take in different things, whether you're a woman in a male space, or you're queer in a straight space, or you are Black in a white space, or whatever it might be. You understand what you need to do, and sometimes you develop tools that include what's now called code switching, mirroring, that kind of double consciousness where you're aware of yourself and also aware of how you're seen, that actually I think is something that can be used to great advantage. And not everyone has that, because if you've never seen yourself as an outsider, then you always only have that one point of view, because that's just all you know and that's all you need to know. But that superpower can be incredibly, incredibly valuable, and I encourage everyone who is in a leadership position from a marginalized community not to ignore that or kind of tamp it down, but actually to use it as best you can. Which leads to this question: why can't movies just be entertainment anymore? I'm sometimes asked, what happened to just good old-fashioned movies that weren't trying to change the world or about anything big? They were just entertainment. And the answer, of course, is that movies were never just entertainment. Movies carry ideology, and like the fish who can't identify the water it swims in, the ideology of a film is often too common and obvious to recognize. And that's why it's a good idea to watch old movies, because the ideology just jumps out at you. If you're watching a movie from the 1930s and you're confronted with the gender rules of the 1930s in America, or confronted with something like blackface, or with just sometimes the cruelty that was just commonplace in movies of a different era, you see what people took as a norm. And I think that experience of watching older movies or movies from another era allows us to read today's movies in a more sophisticated and deeper way. And I think there's no better example than to watch the entire Western genre that came out of Hollywood, where Indigenous people were commonly seen as both enemies and superficially noble, standing in the way of settling the frontier. And that whole idea has been completely turned around by more contemporary understanding. And at the time, it was understood to be completely false as well, as were films like Birth of a Nation or Gone with the Wind. Those films were protested at the time by black audiences, and Indigenous audiences could see some of the things that I think non-Indigenous audiences are seeing in a genre like the Western today. So those same analytical tools that you get, or you hone from watching old movies, become incredibly powerful when you use them to watch the movies that are coming out every week from not just Hollywood, but from anywhere. And you see how no movie is ever just entertainment. So, can movies help us figure out what's going on in the world? I think at their best, they can. They illuminate human complexity, including the complexity of motivations that drive politics and the consequences that result. We're going through so many violent political conflicts right now. Movies aren't the answer, of course, but I think for anyone seeking to gain as deep an understanding as possible, sometimes watching a film that explores the place, the time, the conflict, the people that we're seeing on the news, presented often in such a superficial way, can deepen understanding. And I find it to be a valuable thing to do, because it gives you character dimension, it gives you social context, historical context that you're never going to get even in the most sophisticated news report. We're thinking this through right now at TIFF in terms of what more we can do to help give our audience ways in to some of what we're all seeing right now in so many conflicts around the world. Which leads to this: what do we look for in a movie? And it partly is that sense of a deeper understanding, something that can illuminate our experience or experiences of people that we want and need to understand more. I look for emotion, I look for a high level of craft, I look for surprise, and that's partly a professional hazard, because if you watch, as I do, about 600-700 movies every year, you don't want to see the same formulas, the same stories, the same tropes constantly, but sadly we do. So when you're surprised, that's amazing. I like intensity, and that can be expressed in many different ways. I find that the films of Christopher Nolan have a certain amount of dramatic and formal intensity, but so do the films of Barry Jenkins, so do the films of Claire Denis, so many others. And most importantly, I think, a point of view. I recently watched the film Laura by Otto Preminger on the Criterion channel at home, not in a movie theater, unfortunately. And I was just impressed by the narrative compression, how much that film was able to do in every scene, every glance, every moment, which makes so many of today's films honestly feel a little bit lazy, because there was a level of industrial craft that existed in Hollywood in the 1940s that has shifted. The craft has moved into other areas. There's incredible technical craft now, but the storytelling craft, I think, was honestly, in my experience anyhow, generally superior at that time. So I try to seek out those kinds of things as well. We're almost at the end here, so just a couple of more questions as we get down to number one. Here's one. What's your assessment of how generational shifts, streaming platforms, and the rise of short-form social media video have changed cinema? So this is the kind of thing that we reflect on a lot, and I would just say it's clear from the numbers, as I said earlier, we're spending a lot less time watching movies, or going a lot less frequently than we did before, but we're still spending tons of time watching images. On average, Canadians spend about 6 hours and 35 minutes on the internet every day. So about 46 hours a week. Canadians spend about 14 and a half hours a week on social media and over 23 hours a week watching streaming services. So if you're like the average Canadian, a full day of your week is just watching streaming. And then you have the 6 other days to do the rest of your life. There's a remarkable industry behind that. The Canadian screen industry, movies and TV series for streaming services, conventional broadcasters, and everything else, contributes $13.7 billion to the Canadian GDP. It's mostly series for lots of reasons. And what we try to do is participate in that large industry in a way that I hope helps channel some of that attention, because really this is an attention economy question, some of that attention towards the independent voices, the voices that challenge the status quo, the voices that give us a kind of a wider, deeper look at what moving images can offer. So we play a leading role in the promotion of those independent films, an important national role in exhibiting those films all year round, also through Film Circuit across Canada, and an increasingly important role in the development of Canada's screen storytellers. And we try to make the most of this Canadian advantage we have, being next to the US but not in it, working in two of the most widely seen languages on movie screens, along with, of course, Indigenous languages on Canadian soil, but also the many other languages like Hindi and Korean that now Canadian filmmakers are making films in as well. And also, we've got a very stable, comfortably boring financial sector in many ways compared to other territories, and also a general openness to the world. A city like Toronto, more than half of the residents were born outside of Canada and are plugged into the world, and that's again, an asset to participating in the global screen industry. So our festival, we try to maintain our position as the biggest platform for that Canadian screen business, and what we've created at the Lightbox is that urban cultural hub where community media makers, up-and-coming artists, companies from all over, and some of the world's biggest stars can all share that stage. And we're now at the point, 13 years in, since the opening of TIFF Bell Lightbox, where it seems like everybody comes through the Lightbox, whether it's at the festival or all year round. High and low, famous and non-famous, everybody comes through the Lightbox, which leads to questions like this. And the answer is, she's amazing. When Taylor Swift came to our festival last year, we showed a brand new 35 millimeter print of a short film that she directed. She had directed it using 35 millimeters. She shot with 35 mil cameras, used actual film stock, but there wasn't a print because it was all finished on digital. And we asked her, through her person, to make a print of the film because we thought we would want to screen it that way. In the Lightbox, we can still screen 35 millimeter, unlike many other theaters. And we thought she should have a print as well. So she did that. And we had a great conversation in front of our audience at the festival in what's now the Viola Desmond Cinema, talking about her favorite films. She's, for a person her age, surprisingly knowledgeable about the films of the 1970s, for instance, that heyday of American Hollywood/independent cinema, where filmmakers like Hal Ashby and Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese were making very independently minded films using Hollywood studio money and resources. She could talk film stock, she could talk lenses. She's a pretty impressive person. And hosting events like that, in addition to everything else we do all year round, is how we built an urban cultural hub. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? Yeah? Okay, all right, great. If you have any questions, maybe this might be a good time to turn the lights up. Yeah? Thanks. Not about Taylor, though, right? Anybody? Let's go here first.
So earlier in the talk, you mentioned that films inspire people to have new feelings, or there we go. You mentioned earlier in the talk that films tend to inspire new feelings in people that they otherwise wouldn't have felt. I'm wondering if Korean films specifically validate or normalize feelings felt among Korean people, but not really expressed by them because of the the Sable culture, or the big overlord culture.
Big overlord culture.
The Samsung, the...
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, Chaebol. Oh, yes, right. You know, I spent a fair bit of time in South Korea. They're not frightened by these giant corporations. They're essentially like, GM or Google. They operate there. They're part of the national fabric, but I don't think people are cowed by those giant Korean companies at all. It's a fascinating place, and I'm not sure that South Korean cinema will be able to maintain what it has done with its current generation of great filmmakers, because they're in a different place economically and culturally now, and that generation that produced Bong Joon-ho and Park Chan-wook and the others is not the same as the current generation coming up. So we'll see. What we may see is that same dynamic shift to, I think, Southeast Asia will probably be the next interesting territory. Places like Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam. I think we're seeing some great films coming out of there now, and depending on what happens, those might be the next territories. But the beginning of your question is interesting. I'm told by my Korean-speaking friends that there are nuances in Bong Joon-ho films that if you don't speak Korean and if you don't have the cultural references, you're never going to fully get. And that's true, I'm sure, of every film nation and any national film culture. But there's certain concepts that really reside in the language, and that I think will give an extra resonance for a Korean viewer.
I see. Thank you.
I guess we're going up here next.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I want to start off by saying I love TIFF. I've now been a TIFF member for 2 years in a row. I saw some of my favorite movies at TIFF this year. I'm hoping to ask you about the future of TIFF, if you will. We saw, I guess, from 2022 to 2023, inflation was a thing everywhere, but also, prices went up at TIFF as it did everywhere else. And I'm very curious about how you think this might affect the future, or the movie-going audience at TIFF, and broadly, if you think these economic disparities or something might harm, I guess, the urban cultural hub that is being created here. And I'm not putting it necessarily on TIFF, but I'm putting it in we're in an economic crisis at times, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Sure. It's a great question. We're in a kind of a funny position because we're a not-for-profit, a charitable organization. We try to deliver a lot of what we program for wide audiences as accessibly as possible. On the other hand, there's certain things we do, like sitting down with Taylor Swift, that we could charge $5,000 for and fill the house, right? We don't do that, but there are some things, whether it's her or Lady Gaga or Oprah or whoever it might be, where there is such a high value on the price of that ticket that it kind of can skew things. So we try to find that balance where there are some things where we don't go close to what the actual market would bear, but we try to price it at what we think is a bit more reasonable. And on the other hand, on the other side of things, we try to provide as much access as we can. We work with corporate partners. Right now it's Visa. Before that it was Sun Life, who would actually underwrite free access for hundreds of people attending the festival every year. So that goes on. The year-round membership starts at, if you're a young person, it can start at $49. There's also a free access point. For adults over 25, $99 is the entry point, and you get all of those free Cinematheque screenings as well. So that's something that we offer to make sure that there's always something that is as accessible as possible. And on the other hand, we try to just temper what is the actual market demand on the really, the most in-demand celeb stuff. So it's a balance, and we don't always get it exactly right, but we're trying to do that every time. Oh yeah, where are we? Right here? Okay. Hi.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your talk, Cameron. I'm really curious about your third, and a third of your funding, of TIFF's funding, comes from the public and philanthropists. And tonight, earlier, you met Sue Ditta and Bill Kimball, who are tireless advocates with our, there's a unending advocacy that has to happen on the part of arts organizations with regard to continued funding. And so I would really be interested in hearing TIFF's processes, to the extent that you can share what they are, in terms of, I don't know, if cycles of meetings or kinds of literature that you disseminate to, especially in government.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a involved, complex process, and I think universities probably understand this, as maybe do healthcare facilities, as much as cultural organizations. You're always out raising the money to do what you do. You see what you do is important and valuable and necessary for society, but not everybody does, and sometimes what you do costs a certain amount of money that's just not out there. So we try to hire very good people to do fundraising at different levels. So there's a corporate partnership side, which is, I would say, a little bit more transactional. They're looking for an intersection between the consumers they're trying to reach and the work that we're trying to do in the audience we bring in. Philanthropic donors, different motivation in many cases. Arts donors typically donate because they believe in the art form and they want it to be as accessible as possible to the widest possible audience. But even there, TIFF is different than, say, the Art Gallery of Ontario or the National Ballet. Because we're a popular art form, sometimes we're not seen in the same way by donors. And Anna, maybe you could tell us this better than anybody. It's a different world. And then with government, we're always trying to make the case for why showing movies matters and showing a much more diverse range than we all get in our usual Hollywood diet. And I think at a time when social cohesion is fraying, it seems like everywhere, where just basic human skills like empathy are in question, not just film, but I think most art forms can offer that. And any art form that is a collective art form, that's where being a popular art form actually helps, where people already love movies. Not everybody's ever gone to an opera, but nearly everybody's seen a movie, right? So you might not have seen that 10-hour Filipino film, but maybe we can get you from Barbie to Evolution of a Filipino Family over maybe like 10 or 12 steps, And that's what we try to do. But what works, I think, the best in terms of raising the money is when you actually show potential donors or current donors that experience. You show them the impact. You can describe it all you want. You can give them very pretty materials with pictures and things and graphs and pie charts. But if you invite them to an event where they get to meet an up-and-coming storyteller and they hear from that person how important it is that they get the support to tell the story that's just been burning a hole in their heart for years, that makes a huge difference. And that's what we try to do as often as we can. Other questions? Wait, I think a mic's coming up to you.
I can probably talk loud enough.
All right. Oh, yes.
It's a less important question, but I'm curious about the Summer and the Barbenheimer phenomena and reading about it breaking the analytics. And when people who work in your sector the way that you do look at that, because I took my daughter to see Barbie and Oppenheimer, which is such a strange thing to imagine.
Same day?
Not same day, couldn't do it same day. I'm too busy in the summers. But yeah, no, I did not do the same day. But I'm curious what the takeaways are, that idea that it broke the analytics, like the people who analyze such things
Yeah.
couldn't predict. I'm curious, what are there takeaways, or is it a blip?
There's a famous maxim in Hollywood: nobody knows anything. And a screenwriter said that, and I think that is the lesson. No matter how much we try to make movies a formula, the formula is always going to break. There's always going to be something that's an exception. And we can analyze forever the dynamics of this particular summer that made Barbie and Oppenheimer together such a thing. Obviously, the contrast between the two of them, the male-femaleness of it at a time when gender codes are being played with in a different way, and to sort of mash together the hyper-feminine Barbie with a hyper-masculine Robert Oppenheimer, I think that's part of it, of course. Meme culture, the internet, TikTok, all of those kinds of things were part of it as well. But I think the other thing which we're paying attention to is the experiential quality. These weren't just movies to go to. These were movies to dress up for, especially Barbie, delightfully. You would see young, old women, all kinds of people on the street wearing lots of pink and glitter, and that was amazing. And the idea that movies are not simply a two-dimensional experience to be taken in, but are something to be participated in, and that when you watch Barbie and Oppenheimer together, especially on the same day, you're creating that mashup yourself. You're not just a kind of a consumer of an experience that's so pre-made for you, but you've created that collision of those two contrasts yourself. That, I think, is what is exciting and what is maybe something we should all be paying more attention to. People want to participate in the cultural experiences, in their creation, maybe more than they used to.
Hi, I'm not too knowledgeable with film festival in Canada, but so I don't, TIFF is really the only one I know. Do you see this kind of urban cultural hub be able to replicate anywhere else in Canada? Because it sounds like, 80% of participants are from the GTA, and that's 6 million people. So almost if you plop it in Vancouver, then it's is there do you see this almost like a critical mass of people? Because there is a network effect when it comes to these kind of, it's if you have only 100 people, you can't really go anywhere with it. Do you see that this can happen, something like TIFF can happen anywhere else in Canada?
I think if you adjust for scale, then it absolutely can happen almost anywhere. We are in Salmon Arm, BC, through a film circuit group. We're all across the country in very small centers. That's not the entire TIFF experience, and it's not a film festival necessarily, but we did have film circuit groups in places like Kingston and Windsor that grew into film festivals where there was no film festival before. And the other thing I'll say that I think is really important and maybe not said enough is that we didn't do this in Toronto alone. There was a certain moment, TIFF started in 1976, and there was I would say about 15 years later or so, late 80s into the early 90s, a real flowering of film festivals. The Inside Out LGBTQ festival started around that time. Real Asian did. Hot Docs did as well. All of these festivals fed each other because we were often seeing the same people watching films. And at a certain point, you had a sort of a core group of hundreds of people who would watch tons of film festival movies all year round because there was always the next festival, and that generated a bigger audience for all of us and allowed us to actually continue because we'd created the audience space that we all needed to survive. Many questions down here, but there's somebody else up here first. Go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering, as a young person who is really in love with film culture and everything, are there any specific things that TIFF looks for in their hiring of young people? Or are there any comments that you might have or suggestions for someone who might be, interested in working at TIFF?
I mean, coming out to talks by TIFF staff, that's a good one. It really depends. If you go to tiff.net/careers, we always have any new jobs that are posted there. Just look at the job requirements. I think depending on what you're interested in terms of work at a film organization, the depth of your knowledge, the breadth of your knowledge is really important to know more than just, say, the standard Hollywood diet. We're always certainly on the programming side looking for great communication skills about film. So how you write about film, how you talk about film, that's good. But there are many jobs at TIFF that don't require specialist film knowledge at all. Enthusiasm for movies helps, but there are many departments at TIFF where you just need to be good at that particular position. So I would just keep an eye out. Thanks. Now, there were questions down here, but yeah, Bill's next.
Thank you, Cameron. I just had a question. You made a great point about the Criterion Collection and how important it is that we see older movies and familiarize ourselves with the past, and whether TIFF has ever thought, or has there been a program to go through the Canadian lexicon of films like Wedding in White, some of Adam McGoyan's pictures, and just look at those from a perspective to actually show people and have discussion about those films, because there's a lot of them now, and I think most Canadians are not aware of a film like Going Down the Road or Wedding in White, etc.
That's a great question. We just lost Don Shabib, the director of Going Down the Road, just recently. A classic that I think is still screened in film studies classes or Canadian cinema classes, or maybe it's not anymore, I don't know. But I think not just watching the film, but understanding the conditions of its production, I think, are really important. There's very good film textbooks about the history of Canadian cinema. The thing that we're interested in now, because we are almost 50 years old, is tracing that line of history from before TIFF was around from the National Film Board onward, from the late 30s on through the 70s, and then the filmmakers who are coming now, and trying to see what's common, what's different, how things have evolved, different paths things have taken. The films that are doing very well now, say at the Canadian Screen Awards, include films like Scarborough or Clement Virgo's Brother, films by Quebec filmmakers. We had one called Solo this year by Sophie Dupuis at our festival. And so there is a different generation that are maybe telling slightly different kinds of stories. But I think you can find common threads in terms of how those stories are told. And that is something that I think Canadians could do well to understand more. The way that we program Canadian cinema year-round now, so at the festival we have typically between 25 and 30 feature films, new feature films that we premiere from Canada, which is of course a higher number than probably any other festival that's not a specifically only Canadian film festival. But we also year-round have a program called See the North, where we do one-offs of Canadian films. We had Guy Madden in the Lightbox last week to present a restoration of Archangel. His producer Greg Klimke was there as well. And so now, Guy Madden is of the generation where he's showing a film that's 20 years old or more, and reflecting on it, right? And at a certain point, he was the vanguard, as was Don Shabib, and so trying to make those connections between what was revolutionary then, what's revolutionary now, and how we understand them as part of a common history is what we're trying to do. Yes, there's someone here, but there's others as well. Just behind you first, and then we'll come back to you.
Hi, thank you. Hi.
Hi.
My question is about television, and how do you see the connection between television and streaming services and binge watching in relationship to film and the production of film today?
Mm-hmm. Very big question. I will try to do it justice. And I have to say I'm a kind of a participant observer here, so I watch lots of series on lots of streaming platforms. I have nearly all of them. And I also have a family, so that's what we do. And recently we watched The Bear. We binged that, and it was a great series. And one thing that I was very struck by is how cinematic that series was. In the first season, the first couple of episodes, you could feel the thumbprint of Martin Scorsese on so much of the shooting style, the editing, some of the bravura moves formally. So there's a series that is trying to, absorb the spirit of a great filmmaker. You also have, of course, many filmmakers, Jane Campion with Top of the Lake and so many others who are going back and forth between feature films and series. So those lines are all blurred. It doesn't really matter anymore what form the story takes. But the consumption is so different, right? So watching something together with just only people you know, a small group of people in your house on a smaller screen is so different than the theatrical experience. It gets complicated when somebody like Jane Campion makes Power of the Dog for Netflix, right? We showed Power of the Dog in the Lightbox on our big, beautiful screens, but most people will see that movie as they will see the most two recent Martin Scorsese films, The Irishman and Killers of the Flower Moon, on the small screen. So that's changed things, and then what I think I would encourage is for people to understand the differences between watching a series where, next episode, 20 seconds, and you just go right into the next one, from watching a film and the opportunity to reflect at the end, because a film has an end, and series takes a long time to get to the end. And I think that process of actually digesting what you've watched is so important, and it's just very different between feature films and binge watching series. That's just one slice of an answer to a very interesting but big question.
Thank you.
Yeah, just right in front was, yes, right there.
Yeah, it's kind of, maybe on top of that question. I was driving with my husband the other night, and he said, and we were going to see a live band play, Cowboy Junkies, a couple nights ago. And he said, in a couple of decades or in a decade, there won't be movies in the movie theater anymore. And I got very upset. And
Thank
so, yeah, and so I thought maybe you could give me some ammunition for him to have an argument with him about.
Sure.
But yeah, because he had asked our daughter, and she has no interest in going to the theater because she can stream it all or see it all on so many other platforms on TV at home or whatever. And so I wondered whether that concerned you, this notion that we don't need to go to the theater anymore.
Yeah, I understand where that's coming from. I would beg to differ.
Me too.
Yes. There are many movies that people will watch and absorb at home. Sometimes not even on a TV screen, but on a laptop, on a tablet. I saw somebody watching The Irishman on a plane on their phone. So, I don't know what to do about that. But, however, at the same time, I think once you have one of those truly transformative film experiences, and it doesn't have to be a big blockbuster movie. Like, many of us who went to see Avengers Endgame in the theater, we all saw those moments when everybody sort of applauded in the middle of the film when those moments happen, whether it's Thor's hammer or whatever it might be. And that's something that you don't get from watching at home, right? It's a kind of a heightened emotional experience that you can only get with other people in the dark in a movie theater. But it can also be watching a powerful documentary that moves you, and that's going to move you way more in a movie theater than it will at home. And I think we're human beings. We're never going to not want those experiences, I think, right? We don't always get them. A lot of movies disappoint us. But when you feel that one that really does it for you, you're going to seek it out more. And so that's why I don't think movies are going to disappear any more than any other art form that saw its heyday a long time ago has disappeared. Theater hasn't disappeared, right? It's not as central as it used to be, but it hasn't disappeared. Poetry hasn't, so many other things. So they will continue to exist so long as they deliver that experience, I think. Tell them that.
I did.
It was just wonderful, thank you. And I've got movies going through my mind that, had me feeling bereft and uplifted, and thank you for stirring those emotions again. And I think you really did justice to the theme of the lecture, business and society. So you spoke about the business of what TIFF is all about, but society, and just reminded us all, beyond entertainment, aesthetics, and escapism, the very powerful role that art and film specifically plays in exploring issues, eliminating the human complexity, deepening our understanding of people and history. And so it's just been a lovely talk, and I know people were very engaged, and we're so grateful you spent the afternoon with us in Durham and here, and dinner as well. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing this and lifting up our souls this evening. Thank you. And again, thank you to Don and Anna for establishing this lecture series and for suggesting and inviting Cameron. We really have enjoyed this evening, and we're very grateful for all you have and continue to do for Trent. And thank you, everybody. Please join us. We've got some snacks. Stay and talk and share your favorite films and ones that others should see and what they made you feel. Good night, everybody. Thank you.